Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Manzoor Sheikh from GHS Wilgam. It's class 10 subject science, and today's topic is the advantage of sexual reproduction over sexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, the offspring is although similar to their parents, are not identical to them or one another. In sexual reproduction, what happens? The male gametes comes from the male, that is man, and the female gametes, that is egg and ova, comes from the female. So these ova or egg female gametes contain different genes. These genes come from different organisms, that is male and female. Different species, different organisms of the same species. So there is variation in genes. One gene, some genes coming from the parents, that is male, and some genes comes from the mother, that is female. And these genes combine to form a diploid cell, that is called a zygote. So the zygote will be totally different from the mother or the father, or the male gametes or female gametes. This is a combination of both male and female gametes. This is because the offspring receive some genes from the mother and some genes from the father. Because of mixing of genes of mother and father in various different combinations, all the offsprings have genetic variations. So what happens, why the offsprings are not similar or not identical to their parents, are not identical to their father or mother, or I simply will say why they are not identical to their parents. Because these genes, some of the genes comes from mother and some of the genes comes from the father. So there is genetic variation. So sexual reproduction leads to a greater variation in the population. The population increases, and there is greater variation in the population. There is greater variation in the population. It is because some genes come from the parents, from some genes comes from the mother, and some genes comes from the father. And these genes combine through the gametes, that is male gamete and female gamete, and giving rise to the offsprings. And offsprings have a total different combination of these genes, and that leads to the variation, to the genetic variation. So sexual reproduction leads to the greater variation in the population. This is the advantage of sexual reproduction over asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction promotes diversity of characters in the offspring by providing genetic variation. Due to this genetic variation, due to the various genes or genetic variation, this leads to the diversity of characters in offsprings of the humans. If we will talk, that is there will be diversity of characters. Different characters will be found in the animals having combination of male gamete and female gamete, or combination of different genes from different parents, that leads to the offspring is having different genetic variation. And when there is genetic variation, that leads to the diversity of characters in these organisms, in these animals. Those animals which are produced due to the sexual reproduction, and sexual reproduction occurs only when there is combination of male gamete and female gamete, and male gametes comes from the male and female gametes comes from the female. Male gametes contain different genes from those of the female gametes. So there is genetic variation, and this genetic variation leads to the diversity of characters in the animals, in the offsprings. This is one more characteristic, or it is one more advantage of sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction plays an important role in the origin of new species. This genetic variation leads to the continuous evolution of various species to form better organisms. Sexual reproduction, as you know, contain genetic variation due to the different genes from different, due to combination of different gametes from different organisms, that leads to the genetic variation, and the genetic variation leads to the evolution, continuous evolution of various species to form better organisms. When there is evolution, in every evolution, what happens? Better organisms are produced, that is organisms and takes place or produced as a result of genetic variation, because after every evolution the different species are produced, various species are produced with better organisms having different characteristics, having diverse characteristics that leads to the development or production of better organisms. But in asexual reproduction, what happens, the offsprings are identical to their parents because they have the same genes as their parents. The offsprings have the same genes as their parents, and that leads to the identical shape of the offsprings with their to their parents. And their offsprings are same, identical to their parents, because there is not any kind of genetic variation. Some organisms comes from the same organisms, offsprings come from the same parents, and there is not sexual reproduction, there is not combination of these genes that does not lead to the variation. So genetic variation is not possible in asexual reproduction. This is one of the disadvantages of asexual reproduction. This will not lead to the variation. This will not lead to the evolution of organisms, new organisms. If you see while in the plants where asexual reproduction takes place, there you will never see evolution. Different characters will never be found in the offsprings, because these organisms do not contain the different genes. They contain the same genes from the same parents. So advantage of sexual reproduction is that they have different genes that leads to the evolution. And with the evolution, what happens, different organisms with the diversity of characters, and there is a continuous evolution of various species with better organisms coming day by day, or in generation after generation, by better organisms comes due to the sexual reproduction. This was the advantage of sexual reproduction over asexual reproduction. This is disadvantage of asexual reproduction. We are saying here that asexual reproduction, the parents are coming same as to the offsprings are coming same as their parents, and there is no change. There is no better organism found in these organisms, found in these asexual reproduction organisms. The better organisms will be found only in the sexual reproduction organisms, where sexual reproduction takes place. And I told you why it is the why evolution or diversity of characters placed, because there is variation of genes, and these two genes come from different organisms of the same species. Males have their own genes and females have their own genes. The combination of these genes gives rise to a better organisms. So with this, we completed this today's topic, the advantage of sexual reproduction or asexual reproduction. With this, thank you. Have a nice day.